G'day everyone and welcome to the round 23 and final AFL fantasy wrap-up video for the season. And hopefully you all finished off the season strongly. It's definitely been a crazy year of AFL fantasy, but definitely enjoyable at the same time. And for my team, I scored 23-11 to finish off the season, which I was pretty happy about. It seemed to be a pretty solid score for the round overall. And that sees me finished with an overall ranking of 759th overall to end the season, which I'm very happy about. I think it's definitely been one of my highest rankings that I've achieved for at least 3 to 4 years, I think. So very happy with that. And I think any team that manages to finish inside the top 1,000 has done a pretty decent job. I think it definitely shows that you're being competitive and been around the mark. And definitely congratulations to anyone who finished much higher than that, especially top 100. Must be a great feeling to earn one of those hats, and that's definitely a goal of mine in the future. So looking back at the trades that I made going into that final round now, and it was definitely very difficult for me to decide which two players to trade out. There was definitely a lot of options that I could have chosen from, but in the end I ended up landing on just trading out the two midfielders, Lachie Neale to Paddy Cripps. I was just worried about a tag with Lachie Neale, so that's why I traded him out and brought in Cripps because of that matchup against the Pies, which I thought he'd do quite well in. And with the other trade, I ended up going really unique with that one. Jack Macrae to Jai Simpkin. Now, with Simpkin, I thought he had a very good matchup against the Gold Coast under the roof at Marvel. He's been in great form, actually, in the last month, so I thought I'll just have a throw at the stumps there. No one will bring in a guy like Simpkin in, so thought I'd be really unique with that and see how it went. And he didn't go too well, but in the end, you just go with that. I'm happy with the decision I made there. So now look back at the team and how it went in round 23. I'll go through it a bit differently this week. I won't go through every player individually just because it's not as relevant now, but I'll just go through and highlight some players that I thought had the most influence on my team this week. And we'll start in defence. Sam Docherty, 137. He's been awesome, particularly the last couple of weeks since he's moved into the midfield for the Blues, and I think that's something to watch out for next year. We've obviously seen Rory Laird make that transition from that sort of half-back role into that midfield, and he ended up being the number one player in fantasies this season. So I think Sam Docherty has that sort of capability to also move into that midfield and end up being that premium sort of midfielder for us in fantasy. So who knows if he keeps that role next year, but it's definitely something to look out for. Obviously he'll keep his defender status, but if he moves into that midfield, he's just going to absolutely rack it up. So definitely something to keep an eye on next year. The other one who really stood out this week in defence is obviously James Sicily and that monster score of 151 against the Dogs, and he was just absolutely dominating that game, particularly in the first half. He just seemed to pop up and take marks for fun, and it was definitely amazing to watch from a fantasy perspective. A 114-point first half, if you don't mind, which is just insane, really, particularly for a defender. And he's had a very good season, Sicily. So, that score just definitely helped out my round this week. In the midfield, Zach Merritt, who I actually had the vice-captain on this week, which is very handy. And I ended up taking his score of 125 as my captain. And definitely thought after a tough week for the Bombers, I thought he'd come out firing on Saturday night against the Tigers. So, that ended up working very well for me. Jack Steele, he was probably the other sort of midfielder that really stood out. 139 against the Swans. He was massive. Patrick Cripps scored a 95 against the Pies, which is a little disappointing from a fantasy perspective. Definitely thought he was capable of more than that, but he played an awesome game, though. He was an absolute contested beast, so it wasn't like he played a bad game or anything. Just didn't quite translate to fantasy this week. And then we have Jai Simpkin, who I touched on before, brought in as a very unique pick this week, and he looked pretty good up until three-quarter time, but had a poor last quarter and ended up on 94. So that wasn't ideal, but I definitely don't regret taking the chance on Jai Simpkin. And then we have Andy Brayshaw there, who you might notice who I actually benched this week. I ended up taking his score in the end, but I thought I'd just loop him just because of that fear of the tag. And that tag ended up eventuating from Harry Perryman. So he ended up working through it okay to end up on 89. So I ended up taking that score anyway, but I just thought I'd bench him just in case he went awful. And as for the rucks this week, they were very underwhelming. Rowan Marshall, 47, absolutely stunk it up. And Tom Campbell coming back into that side meant he wasn't that solo ruck, and which just really confuses me, I think, that decision. Why would you bring in Tom Campbell after Rowan Marshall has just been dominating the last few weeks as solo ruck? I have no idea why they did it, but yeah, at least everyone by this point of the season had Ron Marshall, so I didn't have a huge impact on my score. Max scored 77, a little bit disappointing, but yeah, still happy that I owned him in the end. And as for the forward line this week, they did pretty well, as you can see. Bailey Smith was probably the only disappointing one with a 74, but he was tagged by Finn McGuinness, but ended up working through that quite well in the last quarter. They dropped the tag in the end, so 74, take that from him. The big one there, Josh Dunkley, 132. He's had an awesome season, and yeah, everyone owns him, so it didn't have a huge impact on my overall score. But yeah, he was fantastic. Will Brodie there with the 117. What a season he's had, just week in, week out, getting the job done. And Tim English was the other one. He was awesome against the Hawks there, and yeah, he's had a very good season. I think he's definitely one that we probably all start with next year. He'll be solo ruck for the Dogs, so he's probably an absolute lock for next year at this stage. So yeah, that's how my team performed in round 23. A pretty solid score of 23-11 to finish the season off. And yeah, as I mentioned before, we finished with an overall ranking of 759th, which, yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm pretty happy with. So to reflect a little bit on my season now, I might just revisit my round one team and yeah, the team that I started with all the way back in March. And yeah, it's definitely crazy to look back on it now. There's just so many players that yeah, I can't believe I actually started with. And in defence, obviously you can see there, Justin McInerney. He was someone I thought was in for a breakout season. I actually tipped him to be a smoky All-Australian. But yeah, that didn't pan out well, did it? And yeah, I definitely regret how I started my defence this season. I thought I definitely got the structure wrong. Someone who really hurt me early days in the season was not owning Jaden Short. And you might remember he was just pumping out 120 to the first month or so of the season. I just remember how painful it was to watch him just absolutely rack it up in the back line. But yeah, I still got a couple of picks right in defence. Obviously, George Hewitt and James Sicily, they were fantastic and they were a very popular combination to start the season. And it's not very often that you kind of start with a sort of mid-price pick and they end up just doing really well. And yeah, George Hewitt, he was fantastic and there was no need to trade him out right up until his injury. And yeah, James Sicily never left my side all year. So yeah, they were two great picks that worked out really well. In the midfield, Lachie Neale is the one that kind of stands out. He was an awesome pick, one of my best picks of the season, I think, and he actually started at a discounted price based on that hampered sort of season he had last year with injury, and yeah, now he's going to be one of the favourites for the Brownlow this year, so he was absolutely fantastic. And then we had Caleb Sarong there. I actually can't believe that I started with Caleb Sarong, to be honest. And I'm not too sure what I was thinking there in hindsight, but yeah, all I remember was he was absolutely atrocious to start the season, and I couldn't have traded him out quick enough. But in saying that, though, I actually think he's a nice option for next year, as he did finish the season off very strongly. His last month or so, I think, was absolutely fantastic. So I think I probably went 1 year too early on him, and I think he's a nice option for next year. I also started with Jai Caldwell there in the midfield at M5, which was an interesting pick. And in hindsight, I don't think I quite nailed the midfield structure to start with. I was probably lacking one extra elite premium there. And yeah, Caldwell, he was pretty good. He started the season off strongly, but yeah, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have started with him there. As for the forwards, I think I did pretty well there to start with. Obviously, Josh Dunkley, Adam Treloar, he was pretty good for the majority of the season. Stephen Cornelio, and obviously Will Brodie, who's being one of the picks of the season. So yeah, I think I did quite well there to start off with in the forward line. So yeah, that was my round one team, the team that I started with, and I ended up finishing round one with a ranking of 12,859th overall. So it definitely goes to show that you can definitely improve your ranking a long way throughout the season. And looking back at the halfway point of the season, back in round 12, I was actually still ranked 4,500, so it wasn't going too well up until the buys, but I think definitely post-buys, I definitely started to make a charge towards the end of the season, and it ended up finishing the season overall round 23 at 759th overall. So yeah, that was kind of how my team progressed throughout the season. So as for some of my best picks of the season, I think in defence, Sam Doherty and Jack Sinclair, they were both absolutely huge for me, and I think from memory I picked them both up mid-season in the space of 2 weeks, I think. So they ended up being probably the top two defenders of the year, so they were huge for my season. As I touched on before, James Sicily, he was a fantastic pick, ended up averaging 96 for the season and didn't leave my side at all, so he was great. As for my midfield, I actually completely changed my mids over the year, but someone who I was really happy to pick up very early on was Andy Brayshaw, and he ended up averaging 112 for the season, so he was enormous, and he'll definitely feature come Brownlow night. in the rucks, I think Rowan Marshall was a very good pick towards the back end of the season. I think from memory, I picked him up the week he was named solo ruck once Paddy Ryder was out. So it definitely was great to bring him in as soon as he started to hit form. And as for the forwards, Marcus Bontempelli was a very good pick. I picked him up straight after his bye, and yeah, he had an enormous back half of the season. And obviously Will Brodie, who I'm pretty sure most people started with, but yeah, he didn't leave my side at all year, and yeah, he was very good, very consistent as I mentioned, and yeah, 117 to finish off the season was fantastic. So yeah, that's the end of the fantasy season for 2022. It's definitely been a very long year, that's for sure, but yeah, definitely a very enjoyable one at the same time. And yeah, what I'd recommend to any fantasy nerds like myself out there is, yeah, going into preseason for next year, I just think, just have a look at the top 5 or so sides in the overall rankings this season, and just take a few screenshots of their team and jot down maybe a few trades that they made throughout the season, just to see if you can notice any sort of patterns. And yeah, obviously look back at their starting team, see what sort of structure they had. I think it's very valuable to do that, just to have an idea of what a team looks like that can go on and win the whole comp or finish right up there. So yeah, that's what I definitely recommend. I've been doing that the last couple of years, just taking a few notes on the top 5 or so sides that finished in the overall ranking. So yeah, definitely recommend doing that for any hardcore fantasy fans like myself. So yeah, that's all for today's video, guys. Thanks to anyone who tuned into any of my videos right throughout the season. It's definitely much appreciated. Yeah, I started doing these videos just for a little bit of fun at first, but yeah, I definitely didn't think that I was going to go right throughout the season to round 23. But yeah, I basically did that just because of the interaction that I was getting pretty decent views each week. So yeah, thanks to all your support out there, and thanks to anyone who commented, interacted, liked the video, and yeah, just watched the video at some point throughout the season. Definitely appreciate it. And yeah, I actually originally designed this channel for all types of sports content, as you can probably tell by the title, but I think now I'll probably just keep it to AFL fantasy. I think that's probably the most easiest way to go, I think. And yeah, I definitely think I'll be back next year to do it all again, starting from a massive preseason. I'll definitely look to pump out a few different preseason videos, but yeah, feel free to drop in the comments any sort of videos that you'd recommend, any sort of videos you'd like to see. I'm definitely open to new ideas of kind of shaking things up a bit and doing things a little bit differently next season. So any sort of content in the year after, just let me know in the comments. So yeah, thanks to all who watched the videos this year, and yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the finals now and watching games without having to worry about fantasy scores. And yeah, I'm a massive Geelong supporter, so definitely keen for the finals now. I'll be right in the thick of the action. So yeah, thanks all for watching, and we'll see you next year.